Hey everybody, John at IPT. Today we have a little bit of a mess on our hands. We shipped the transmission out to somebody and it got damaged in shipping, so it had to come back here, get welded up. But this is for my DSM people. This is going to serve as a final assembly video because we had to empty this whole thing out so we could send it to the welder. Now we're going to put it back together. All right, so this is the area of the damage. This is for your rear mount. Sure you DSM guys are familiar with this. So this whole piece, and it's not uncommon. You know, sometimes when these things take a hit, it breaks this whole piece off. And the thing was literally gone. So our man William, this is some real old world European craftsmanship right here. He actually created this out of weld. And it looks like nothing ever happened. Really incredible job. And I'm just going to show you real quick a factory one so you could compare. So this is a factory unbroken one, and it's incredible that you could just make this whole piece out of weld, to me anyway. I mean, I'm not a welder, maybe some of you guys are, but I'm so impressed with this. This is artwork. All right, here's where we like to start. We're going to put our pinion in, and if you notice, these bolt holes are not evenly spaced. So the two that are far apart, locate these down in here. And I apologize, the lighting probably isn't too terrific, but I get down in here with this and I try and center it so I can get the bolts in. All right, so when you feel like it's almost down, then put your bolts in and see if you could catch a thread or two on all of them. Ugh, kind of hard to get in here. On the assembly line, they probably have smaller hands, so to speak. Okay, so when you have some bolts in, you just want to, you know, get that solid sound when it's seated. Hear that? Oop. Dead thud. And if anybody cares, I like 42 foot-pounds. Sorry, I'm like battling it out with the camera. Sorry, Ken. Okay. Now, you want to make sure it turns freely by hand. And in the world of cone-shaped bearings, there's something that you call bearing preload. So you want to make sure this has a little resistance on it. Not a lot, but you need some. Now, a lot of people think that you have to mess with this bolt here, right? That engages into here. But all that does is keep this from rotating. So you never ever have to take that out or put it in. I mean, like the first one of these things I did, I'm like, okay, let me take this out because I need to do that to get the support out, but that's definitely not the case. So now this is kind of the same thing. You got to put it down and tap it gently, except for there's a shim that lives in here. And also you guys that are, say you send a center diff out to get welded, or you want to change your center diff, it's pretty interesting. Like all these shims that set the carrier bearing preload, from the factory, every one I've ever measured in all these years, they're the exact same thickness, which tells me that you could swap center diffs around and it's not really going to affect the preload. So when you put this in, this notch has to kind of clear this bolt. And it's like kind of an exact fit. So you don't want to cock it and then you're going to have a whole world of trouble fighting with the thing. I don't know if we could see in here that it's, oh wow, I was able to push that down by hand almost. I don't know if you can see where the bolt is engaged in there. And just for fun, Give it a couple more taps. Next is our center diff. And this is welded. We weld all of them here. This is bad mojo. There's 4 spider gears in here, kind of like you have in this diff. So what the thing is, like say you're doing a one-wheel peel in a front drive, these things are going to overspeed like crazy and they weld themselves to the pin, right? Because they're trying to do 2 different things at once. This thing comes with a viscous clutch that sits on top of it that tries to control that and bias your torque front to rear. But you got to remember, these cars had 175 horsepower or so from the factory. So everybody's minimum that I see is at least double that. So that viscous clutch has no prayer whatsoever of biasing torque back and forth. And these things spin up like crazy and it welds itself together in here. So this is an extreme failure part. And for reliability, you need a welded center diff in one of these. And sometimes these things can get a little bit tight. Just by virtue of welding them, the splines get tight in there. It's not the case with this, but you know, don't feel guilty if you have to tap it a little bit because that's not abnormal. We'll engage this on the splines. Give it another tap. And then we got to put our housing in. Right? So flat, flat. And again, just finesse is the key here. You don't want to try and pound these things in. All right, so once you have this almost all the way down, you could do another one of these to make sure it's centered. And again, you don't want to try and tighten them down unless everything is plumb and true. Couple love taps. And the torque spec on this is a couple boogadas. Boogada, boogada, boogada. You get the idea. So now I like to reach in here and make sure I could turn this and again feel some of that resistance from the preload on the bearings. Next is our idler gear, I guess we'll call it. We have a washer that goes in here, and this engages into here. And if you could come in from on top, you got to make sure this is perfectly centered because this whole guy has to go in there. Like it's possible to catch the edge of it and then bend the thing. Also important to note, you have 2 bearings here. When you put this gear in, there's an ID mark. That ID mark needs to face up. You need to be able to see it if you have it in this position. So if you put this in wrong, these teeth are not going to engage correctly with the teeth in here and these other teeth. And it's going to be what we call a misbuild, i.e. a fuck up. So now we got to slide this whole shooting match in. And, you know, we got to finesse this a little bit. And this needs to line up with this notch in the case because we have a little locking tab. I also kind of like a little Loctite on here too. So again, I kind of like the 42 foot-pounds. Then there's tabs on here. Hopefully we don't need because of the Loctite. So now once that's tight, again, you want to make sure this has some spinach and some resistance. Next is our differential. It's got like a main cap on it. It's notched, right? That notch is for it to clear your speedo. So it's kind of easy to see where it goes in. And I just leave these loose for now until I get the bearing cap. All right, now we're gonna put the cap on. There's another shim that lives in here, and it's kind of the same deal. They're all the same size. So that tells me at the factory level, way back when they made these things, the machining was pretty accurate. You know, there's a whole bunch of parts that have to do with what you need for the shim, from the differential case to the transmission case to this cap. Like on down the line, there's a million things that could change what shim you're going to need there, but they're always the same. And we tighten those two up last. And I believe Kigley or someone makes a billet main cap for this, which is pretty cool, but I can't say that I've seen one break ever. And we've been building these things for over 20 years now. Well, as a performance business, I was doing these things back in the late 80s. Not these, but the naturally aspirated ones that came out a little bit earlier. I think they came out in 1985 in Galance. But I was doing these things in my mom's garage, like right out of high school. But it just, this is old hat. These are a pretty simple transmission. I know a lot of you guys are putting them together yourselves now or freshening them up. And that's cool. You know, we sell all kinds of parts, rebuild kits. The hard parts are getting more difficult to find, but they're still out there. And you guys, if you own these things, if it was me, I would buy a core or two to have a couple used transmissions laying around, because it's going to be pretty soon that you're not going to be able to get shit for these things. You know, you're going to have to work out of your own parts pile. Next, I like to put the end clutch on. I'm not going to bore you with this. It's kind of all sitting there the way it needs to go. Let's find my bolts. And these things are getting old. A lot of times the threads are pulled and things like that. So when you work on these things, just inspect all your threads and make sure everything's perfect. You know, you start pulling threads out on some of these things, you're going to be in a whole world of shit that you don't want. So now my shaft came out. I'm going to put it back in. When you work on these, the short splines go to the outside. The long splines go to the inside. And as I've mentioned in other videos, always change that bushing because it's real important in the context of your lube system. Right? This seals everything. See how this has no movement in it? If it does, it's going to, all this oil that pressurizes this shaft is just going to be pissing into here and lubing the hell out of your end clutches, but that's not really going to do much good for your planetaries and all the stuff that sits on this shaft. So now I just kind of balance this. There's some kind of miscellaneous part here. And some of this stuff, there's different ways to do it. You know, I put these together a certain way. Other people do it differently. Which only means that they're wrong and I'm right. So let's do it my way. Don't laugh at me, Ken.
It's always
bearing.
Greener on the other side of the fence.
Well, next are low and reversed frictions and steels. We have a flat pressure plate, and we have a beveled pressure plate. The flat one is going down in your transmission. The beveled one is going to sit up, and this guy is going to sit up on top of it. That's your return spring. There's also a cushion that sits in here. And I really haven't seen it on the F4A33s and W4A33s. But back in the naturally aspirated ones, this thing always used to break. That was like a giant source of problems in the things. But we're going back to like before some of you dudes were born. We're talking like the mid-80s here. My dumb ass was working in my mom's driveway in the freezing cold. So we alternate frictions and steels. I don't know how far I'm going to get with this video because it's Friday and, you know, Ken's ready to have a couple beers and I'm ready to get the hell out of here. I believe I might have COVID again. That's going to get my video flagged on YouTube, right? I mentioned the friggin' virus. Don't worry, this transmission is yours. I didn't cough in it. Okay, this is another important thing. These seals on here. And I see a lot of people fuck this up. So first point, if you have this in and you take it out, these holes that correspond to this in the case sometimes will slice that seal and you have like a little chunk sticking out of it. But the main issue is people clock them wrong. Can we get in here, Ken? I could show where the feed holes are. Like we have a feed hole here, and that comes from your valve body and feeds the drum. And this other hole is just for the pressure takeoff. So if you had to measure pressure in this clutch pack, you would be able to do it from there. So now when you put this in, you have to get this to engage into the sprag. And obviously, like I said, you have to have it clocked right. So here has got to be here. And if you don't do this,
You have your cushion?
I do.
Okay.
Thanks, Dad. Oh, I just clocked it wrong. Son of a bitch. Let me fix this error. And this is another way. This is how I like to take them out. All right, just grab that snap ring pliers. It's on gear 1, it's on gear 2. You have a race in here too. I've seen people screw that up, like they don't put that race in, and it turns this thing into a machine shop, and it's pretty ugly. So we'll go over this again. This goes here. Okay, so you're going to see this is like mostly all the way down, but there's still a little pressure on it. I mean, if this snap ring doesn't kind of go right in, you have something wrong and this isn't going down all the way. All right, so now you want to see that that's like popped in there. Now while you're here, it's a very good time to air check your clutch pack. And this is a common situation. I see you guys talk about it on the internet. People call up. They have no reverse. So when you have this on the bench, you see that? I mean, can you get down here, Ken? And I can show where it's. We come in here. And if it backs up like that, you have no leakage, okay? And obviously, if it's not clocked right, it's just gonna hiss, and you're not gonna have any application. All right, so now that's good. I will take a moment to pimp our red line bands that we're using now. Now, some of these have an arrow on them. Some of them don't. But as you can see, this lug is offset, right? So you always want this offset towards the bottom of the case. And this arrow, and some people don't know this, arrows are always supposed to face towards the front. So if you see an arrow on a part, it's telling you that faces towards the front. Okay, so what I do differently than some people is I put this whole assembly in at once, which means engaging these splines, these bushings, these splines, the splines inside, and the outside diameter has got to go around the band. So you have to kind of hold it like this so this doesn't drop out on you. And that's it. I mean, I see people struggling with these things, and it's, you know, it's unnecessary. Don't struggle, guys. So you always want to grease these rings in. A lot of times people tear these rings when they're putting the pump down. No bueno. So what I like to do is put a couple of these studs in here. Maybe one day I'll do another video on a whole build, you know, when we get down into the nitty gritty, but this is pretty much just a final assembly. Okay, so that peels down all the way. Now we have our pump bolts, and these all have washers that go on them, right? These washers are seals. You got to make sure you have those, or you're going to be leaking. Not ideal. Okay, so when you have this together, we want to see that we have end play. So the easiest way to do that is I air check the end clutch. Are you capturing this, Ken? And as you can see, we have transmission end play. You know, and you always want to be able to turn a transmission by hand once it's together. Now we could check our other drums. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the servo, when we put that in, we're going to have both an apply and a release. So next, our servo. Okay, so this is another, I don't know, area where I get a lot of questions. Like adjusting this band, and people get the shift kit and it tells you to adjust the band. Here's a trade secret. Don't fucking touch the band. It'll be fine. I'm going to put this in and I'm going to show you how to confirm that it's fine, right? Because what we want is about 1/8 of an inch of servo travel. And why that's important is your oil comes in here and applies the band, it puts it on. Great. But when a band releases, 2 things have to happen. Your direct clutch gets filled up, and then there's a parallel oil circuit that releases your servo at the same time. Okay, so that has to be coordinated, or you're either going to have a tie up or you're going to have a flare. So people do stupid shit like make these bands too tight, and they, you know, you end up with a tie up. It's like a kind of a temporary condition where you're in 2 gears at once, which is really hard on stuff. We have a spring under there. Hopefully you guys noticed that. And people fuss a lot on getting this thing in too. So what you got to do is put your snap ring in. Or this is how I do it, which we went over. That's the only way to do it. So now it's in. Can we all agree? Good. Now once you have it in, we are going to check this with air. And if you guys want, you can't really visualize this, you could kind of carve a mark in here with this, right? Because that way we could see how far it comes out. So this tip is spring loaded. So what we're going to do is put this drill bit in here to keep that from being able to compress. I'll try and do this and keep my hand out of the way so we can see. Maybe I'll have to go lefty here. So with the drill bit in, we can hit the servo apply. And as you can see, can you see? It's only moving about 1/16 of an inch. Now the drill bit back out. And the other check is you always want to make sure trans turns backwards, right? So if your band is too tight, you're not going to have it turn backwards. So I don't know if you guys can see this moving here. Well, you probably can't see it till it, see the whole hole is gone. Okay, so we could turn this thing backwards. We know the servo apply worked. Now this is our servo release. Apply, release. Okay, so in the shift kit, this is really not pertinent to putting this back together, it's just a point of information. They have you put a little slug in here to make this hole smaller. So what's that do? That slows down the release of the band, right? So your front clutch apply is more coordinated with the band release. You know, these things are known for burning out the the front clutch. And a lot of it is a timing issue. Like that timing has to happen right. Otherwise, it just puts unnecessary wear on things. So it's more about, precision, having everything working correctly in your valve body and all of this stuff set up correctly. So now the rest is just basically bullshit, which you guys probably know how to do already, like putting the valve body on and putting the other servo cover on, which is that's easy stuff. So I think I'm going to stop here on this video. I have other videos on valve body stuff if you want to look, but again, it's Friday and we want to get the hell out of here. I want to make you guys a video. This was an opportunity to do it quick, so we'll leave it at this.